The Royal Lodge, the 30-room residence of Prince Andrew and his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson, has sparked public outrage over its lavish grandeur and the prince's right to live in such splendor on a crown estate property.
The iron gates of Royal Lodge, once a symbol of quiet privilege, are now sealed shut. The vast gardens are empty, the windows dark. Inside the 30-room Windsor mansion, where laughter and luxury once echoed, silence has finally settled. Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, is gone. No farewell, no statement, no public goodbye. She simply vanished under the cover of night, her departure marking what many are calling the final, humiliating chapter of her royal life. For 2 decades, Fergie lived a life most could only dream of. She had a royal title, royal protection, and the rarest luxury of all, a crown estate property that didn't cost her a single penny. But what began as a quiet post-divorce arrangement slowly became a scandal. A woman once seen as part of the royal fabric, the so-called third leg of what she dubbed the royal tripod with Andrew and their daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, is now a woman without a home, without a title, and perhaps without a country to claim her. So, how did this happen? How does someone go from Windsor royalty to living in exile at 66? To understand the fall, you first need to understand what she was standing on. Royal Lodge isn't a summer cottage or an honorary grace and favor residence. It's a palatial estate deep inside Windsor Great Park, one of Britain's most exclusive private properties. The Queen Mother once called it home. It is history, power, and privilege wrapped in 98 acres of manicured perfection. And yet, for nearly 20 years, Sarah Ferguson lived there rent-free. Her ex-husband, Prince Andrew, had secured a 75-year lease on the property from the Crown Estate, a lease so favorable it bordered on fantasy.
For the first time ever, Prince Andrew facing the cameras to defend his friendship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
The rent was nominal, effectively symbolic, and the costs of upkeep, heating, and staff were quietly absorbed by Crown mechanisms. By any standard, this was a remarkable arrangement. A divorced woman, no longer a working royal, continuing to live in a mansion maintained by the monarchy's purse. From 2008 onward, after moving back in with Andrew long after their 1996 divorce, Fergie enjoyed the trappings of royal life without any of its duties. She justified it by insisting the arrangement was about family, a united front for their daughters, a commitment to stability. But behind those ornate doors, the story was shifting. Because while she believed Royal Lodge was her sanctuary, the palace had long understood it was her illusion. That final line from Buckingham Palace landed like a thunderclap across Britain. The king has initiated proceedings to reclaim Royal Lodge. For years, whispers had circulated about the uneasy arrangement inside Windsor Great Park. While Prince Andrew had clung to his grace and favor lease, and Sarah Ferguson enjoyed the luxuries of a royal estate without formal standing, the monarchy had watched, silently, strategically. Behind the scenes, the patience of King Charles III had worn thin. To understand how the eviction of Royal Lodge became inevitable, you have to look at how that silence evolved into action. After the disastrous Newsnight interview in 2019, Andrew's public credibility was already destroyed. His ties to Jeffrey Epstein had left the monarchy scorched. But what few realized was that the scandal reached further than just the Duke himself. Multiple sources confirmed that Sarah Ferguson had also accepted financial assistance from Epstein, a loan of £15,000 in 2010 to pay off a personal debt. Though she later apologized.
Really interesting point. So Sarah Ferguson has closed down 6 businesses. A lot of them owe money, or a lot of them just had £1, for shareholders.
The connection never disappeared. For the palace, it was one humiliation too many. Yet, remarkably, Ferguson remained ensconced at Royal Lodge. She hosted charity teas, attended local events, and continued to refer to herself affectionately as part of the royal family. It was an illusion she seemed unwilling to surrender, even as her ex-husband's disgrace deepened. By October 2025, the illusion was finally over. Senior courtiers had been drafting contingency plans for months, and the king's decision came swiftly. In a move compared by historians to the Queen's handling of Prince Edward VIII, Charles approved an unprecedented royal directive. Royal Lodge would be repossessed by the Crown Estate, citing misuse of assets inconsistent with public trust. For Ferguson, it was the moment everything unraveled. Friends described her as stunned but defiant. Her attempts to appeal through intermediaries were quietly dismissed. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, and, crucially, no public sympathy. Even within royal circles, opinion was divided. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie were said to be distraught, caught between loyalty to their mother and the inevitable command of their uncle, the king. The following week, removal crews arrived discreetly under the supervision of royal security. The lights inside Royal Lodge were turned off. The staff were reassigned. The estate was sealed. The woman who had once described the property as a haven of love and laughter was gone, her possessions packed into storage, her forwarding address undisclosed. It was the quietest exit in royal history, and perhaps the most symbolic. The wording in the official notice was mercilessly clear. The lease on Royal Lodge is hereby terminated, not renegotiated.
Trust. The charity Sarah Ferguson has announced it will close for the foreseeable future.
Not reviewed. Terminated. After 20 years and what had been described as a 75-year security of tenure, Prince Andrew's hold on Royal Lodge was over. The Crown had acted, decisively, surgically, reclaiming one of its most prized properties. The order came directly through the Duchy of Lancaster, the King's private estate, and there was no mistaking the message. This was not a negotiation. Even more telling was what wasn't said. The announcement made no mention of Sarah Ferguson, no recognition of her 15 years at the residence, no offer of relocation, no transitional grace period, not even a formal acknowledgement that she had once called Royal Lodge home. She was invisible, erased by omission. For a woman who had built her entire post-divorce identity around that house and her supposed tripod family with Andrew and their daughters, it was the deepest possible cut. She had defended Andrew through scandals, given interviews describing their unbreakable bond, and called their cohabitation a symbol of loyalty and love. Yet in the end, her loyalty wasn't even worth a sentence. Then came a revelation that turned royal gossip into shock. Emily Maitlis, the same journalist who conducted Andrew's disastrous Newsnight interview, revealed on her podcast that the final push to evict Andrew did not come solely from the king. According to her sources, it came from within the family itself, specifically from Prince William, Princess Beatrice, and Princess Eugenie. In Maitlis's account, the daughters who had once been the reason their parents stayed under the same roof were now the ones urging their father to leave. The choice they allegedly gave him was stark: vacate Royal Lodge voluntarily, or risk further damage to their own standing, even reportedly their titles. Whether or not every detail is accurate, the broader truth remains.
The Department of Justice is releasing more files related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. Just this morning, the department said this release.
The family had closed ranks. Andrew was out, and by extension, Ferguson was finished. The eviction notice gave them a deadline, January 25, 2026. When that date arrived, they were still there. But while Andrew at least had a fallback, Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, Sarah Ferguson had nowhere to go. She had once owned a London townhouse worth £4.25 million, a potential refuge. But in a fateful move, she had sold it in 2025, the very year the palace began its quiet campaign to reclaim Royal Lodge. Now, the woman who had lived in a 30-room mansion was reportedly asking about smaller grace and favor homes near Windsor, including Adelaide Cottage, formerly occupied by William and Catherine. It was a desperate, humbling request, one that symbolized just how far the Duchess had fallen. The request for Adelaide Cottage sent quiet shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. Courtiers were alarmed, not only by Sarah Ferguson's boldness, but by the political risk it carried. Granting her another grace and favor home after years of scandal and privilege was unthinkable. Given her past links to Jeffrey Epstein, the scrutiny over royal finances, and her plummeting public standing, the idea of rewarding her with another royal residence was seen as political suicide. The answer, delivered privately but firmly, was no. From that moment, Ferguson's decline accelerated. Her professional life, once buoyed by charm and name recognition, began to collapse in real time. For years, she had tried to craft an independent identity: children's author, motivational speaker, charity founder. But after the October 2025 announcement stripping Andrew of his royal privileges, her fragile empire began to crumble. Records showed that 6 companies linked to her, spanning media, publishing, and lifestyle ventures, were being dissolved simultaneously. Her charity, Sarah's Trust, quietly announced it would pause operations indefinitely, citing reputational challenges. It was polite language for an unspoken truth. She had become a liability. Even longtime partners began to distance themselves. Major organizations like Teenage Cancer Trust and British Heart Foundation quietly scrubbed her name from their websites. There were no public statements, no explanations, just digital erasure. Within weeks, her patronages were gone, her income vanished, and her social credibility evaporated. Behind closed doors, palace aides, those who had once tolerated her antics, now advised her to disappear completely from public life. One former royal staffer reportedly told her bluntly, "Redemption isn't coming. Get a normal job." There were whispers that she'd considered writing a tell-all memoir, one that could generate instant cash and reclaim public sympathy. But even Ferguson seemed to recognize the danger. Such a book would likely destroy the last traces of goodwill she had left, especially within the royal circle that still, technically, shared her last name. By the start of 2026, Sarah Ferguson was a duchess in name only. No home, no charity, no royal favor, and no allies left to defend her. Then came the final blow, and it came not from the palace, but from across the Atlantic. In January 2026, the U.S. Department of Justice released over 3 million pages of documents connected to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Buried within the digital archive were emails bearing Sarah Ferguson's name. For years, she'd called her relationship with Epstein a one-time lapse in judgment, but the emails told a very different story. In one, she referred to him as the brother I've always wished for. In another, she signed off, "I am at your service. Just marry me." The tone was intimate. The connection, undeniable. And with that revelation, any remaining hope of royal rehabilitation was gone. By early 2026, the curtain had quietly fallen on Sarah Ferguson's royal life, and not even the palace seemed willing to pretend otherwise. Her plea for another grace and favor home, including the modest Adelaide cottage once occupied by William and Catherine, had been flatly denied. Advisors warned that granting her new housing would be politically toxic, a dangerous message to send after decades of privilege and scandal. At the same time, her professional world was collapsing. The businesses she had spent years building, 6 in total, were dissolving one after another. Her charity, Sarah's Trust, announced an indefinite closure, citing reputational challenges. In private, that meant her name had become a liability. Even the organizations she once supported, like the Teenage Cancer Trust and the British Heart Foundation, erased her quietly from their websites, severing all ties without a single public statement. Within weeks, the Duchess of York had no patronages, no income, and no way back. Former royal aides suggested she take an ordinary job and stay out of sight. She had even toyed with the idea of a tell-all memoir, but reportedly realized that publishing it would detonate whatever dignity she had left. Then came the blow no one could ignore: the Epstein emails. In January 2026, the U.S. Department of Justice released more than 3 million pages of Epstein-related material. Buried among them were emails signed by Sarah Ferguson herself. They shattered her long-standing claim that her connection to Epstein had been a one-time mistake. In one message, she called him the brother I have always wished for. In another, she wrote, "I am at your service. Just marry me." These were not the words of a distant acquaintance. They revealed a personal, transactional relationship with a man already convicted of sex crimes. The most disturbing revelation came from a 2009 email showing Ferguson had arranged a lunch in Miami that included Epstein and her daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, both in their early 20s, after his conviction. Public outrage was swift and unforgiving. Even worse, a later 2011 message, sent months after she publicly condemned Epstein, showed her privately apologizing for distancing herself from him, describing him as a steadfast and generous friend. Documents also indicated that Epstein had helped pay off portions of her long-standing personal debts. Her spokesperson's brief comment, that she regretted her past associations, did nothing to stem the backlash. Then she vanished. According to the Daily Mail, Ferguson's last confirmed sighting at Royal Lodge was in September 2025, months before Andrew's final departure. Witnesses saw her climb into a car, turn her face from cameras, and disappear. No one saw her return. When Prince Andrew finally left Royal Lodge on February 3, 2026, he left alone. And the woman who had once shared his house, his scandals, and his downfall was gone without a trace. By the spring of 2026, the story of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson had shifted from quiet disgrace to open collapse. What was once whispered behind palace walls had become a matter of public record. Their lives, stripped of privilege, reduced to scandal and silence. When Andrew left Royal Lodge under the cover of darkness, royal commentator Jenny Bond summed it up with brutal honesty. This isn't relocation, it's exile. And she was right. Exiles don't get farewell statements or royal send-offs. They simply vanish, and so did he. But just when it seemed his downfall couldn't go deeper, it did. On February 19, 2026, his 66th birthday, Thames Valley Police arrived at his temporary residence on the Sandringham estate. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, once a senior figure in the royal family, was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The allegation, that during his time as the UK's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment, he had shared confidential government documents with Jeffrey Epstein. If proven, it would be treasonous in spirit, a betrayal of both government and crown. Andrew was held for nearly 11 hours at Elston Police Station before being released pending further investigation. But the damage was already done. He became the first senior royal in modern British history to be arrested, a humiliation unmatched since the days of King Charles I. King Charles III released a brief, tightly worded statement expressing deep concern. Beatrice and Eugenie remained silent. The palace declined all comment. And Sarah Ferguson? She was thousands of miles away. Reports placed her first in the French Alps, then in the United Arab Emirates, attending the Art Basel Fair in Doha with Princess Eugenie, who worked for a London gallery. The timing could not have been more jarring. Her ex-husband under arrest, their Windsor home sealed, and Ferguson smiling at an international art event. Observers questioned whether her travel was purely social or quietly strategic. The UAE, after all, has long been viewed as a safe haven for wealthy Europeans facing legal or financial trouble, with limited extradition obligations to the UK. Officially, Ferguson had no comment, but legal sources suggested that Thames Valley Police might still want to speak with her, given her past financial ties to Epstein and her name appearing in US court documents. A royal expert put it bluntly to Fox News Digital. It's shameful. Both of them should leave Britain quietly and permanently. By then, Ferguson's reality was undeniable. She had no home, Royal Lodge reclaimed, the London townhouse sold. No career, with 6 dissolved companies and a shuttered charity. No royal support, as the palace refused her request for Adelaide Cottage. From the grand corridors of Windsor to borrowed guest rooms abroad, Sarah Ferguson had become the ghost of her own fairy tale. Wandering, unwanted, and unmoored. By the start of spring 2026, even those who once considered Sarah Ferguson a lovable royal eccentric had accepted an uncomfortable truth. Her royal chapter was over. Former aides, many of whom had served her for decades, were now urging her to get a normal job. They said it plainly. There was no path back to royal life, no title to lean on, no public sympathy left to reclaim. At 66 years old, stripped of her home, her platform, and her reputation, Ferguson had become a relic of a bygone royal era. A duchess in name, but one without honor, standing, or purpose. Her HRH status was long gone, her official patronages had evaporated, and her financial lifelines had closed one by one. But perhaps most startling of all was her own sense of denial. According to palace sources, Ferguson still believed she deserved a royal residence. She reportedly told friends she should be treated like Princess Diana, arguing that her decades of association with the monarchy entitled her to the same grace and favor as other former royals. But to insiders, the comparison was absurd and offensive. As one former courtier put it, Diana never called a convicted offender her brother. Diana never appeared in U.S. Department of Justice files. Diana never traded her proximity to the crown for cash. The palace's position was clear. Sarah Ferguson's case was not one of tragedy. It was one of consequence. That brings us to the question at the heart of this story. Was Ferguson's downfall the result of cruel circumstance or her own choices? Because at every critical turn, she made decisions that pulled her deeper into disaster. She chose to remain at Royal Lodge with a man whose reputation had collapsed. She chose to stand by Andrew through every scandal. She chose to maintain contact with Epstein long after claiming she had severed ties. She even sold the London townhouse that could have given her independence. Each decision made sense in the short term: comfort, loyalty, convenience. But together, they formed the slow spiral that now defines her legacy. And through it all, the palace has stayed absolutely silent. When King Charles stripped Andrew of his titles, there was no mention of Ferguson. When Andrew left Royal Lodge, the palace issued no statement. When Andrew was arrested, the official comment was a single line of deepest concern. And when Ferguson vanished from public life, there was nothing. No confirmation, no denial, no acknowledgement. The questions that linger over Sarah Ferguson's downfall are not just about scandal, they're about silence. Silence from the palace, silence from Andrew, and silence from the woman herself. Because that silence now speaks louder than any denial ever could. Inside Buckingham Palace, officials refused to engage with uncomfortable questions. Was the so-called co-parenting arrangement at Royal Lodge really about the children? Or was it a convenient cover for two people who could not afford to let go, financially or emotionally? Did anyone in the royal household truly understand how deep Ferguson's connection to Epstein went? Or did they choose to look away for the sake of stability? The official silence says everything. We are done with this. We are moving on. But for Sarah Ferguson, there is no moving on. Wherever she is, in the French Alps, the Gulf, or tucked quietly into a friend's spare room somewhere in Europe, she carries the weight of it all. The emails, the debts, the documents, the memories of those 30 rooms inside Royal Lodge, now shuttered, silent, and sealed off from her forever. And yet, the story isn't really about real estate. It's about what Royal Lodge came to represent. The illusion of belonging, the comfort of proximity to power, and the devastating cost of mistaking that proximity for protection. Fergie's fall is almost Shakespearean. She arrived at Royal Lodge broken but hopeful, the divorced Duchess who found a home through loyalty, friendship, and what she called the royal tripod. For years, it seemed to work. She smiled from balconies, attended charity galas, and spoke warmly of her unconventional family. But that fragile balance couldn't last. The Epstein scandal took Andrew's career, then his titles, and finally his home. And with each step of his collapse, Ferguson's world crumbled beside his. It wasn't one grand implosion. It was a slow, grinding erosion of privilege and protection until there was nothing left. Her departure from Royal Lodge wasn't a royal exit. It was a disappearance. No photos, no farewell, no public word. One car, one woman, and the gates closing behind her. The palace didn't pause. It didn't even flinch. The monarchy moved forward and she became a footnote. So now the question remains, can she ever find a way back? Could she rebuild her life beyond scandal? Or have the Epstein files, the emails, and the financial trail made redemption impossible? History shows that some people recover from disgrace. Others become cautionary tales. The mansion stands empty, the gates locked, and Sarah Ferguson has vanished into the dark. What do you think? Does she deserve another chance? Or has that chance already come and gone? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe, because this royal reckoning is far from over.